Hello everybody, welcome to week 7 of Biology 1. This is going to be September 28th through October 2nd, I think. 28, 29, 30, 1, 2, okay. So, and when I get through the video, it's going to go right here. I'd like to point out that that's going to end September, and when I put next week's video up and next week's calendar, next month's calendar really, October will go here. Week 8 will go here. It'll be all October, so all of this stuff is actually going to be put into its own folder called September stuff, and it'll be right there. I'm going to go ahead and open up the calendar here, and I want to remind you to click this little button here at the top, the funny little X. That means make it, expand it, make it bigger. Where in this case we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom. Now I want to remind you that last week was honestly a fairly light week. I asked you to do the potato osmosis at home lab, and then check out all of these things. There was a mastery test that I wanted you to do, and then the cells activity. These are going to be graded this week and put in. This week is going to be even lighter because we're going to do a post test today on cells. There is a crash course video I want you to watch on the nervous system, and then we're going to have a tutorial on the nervous system, which I'm going to open up and show you now. While it's opening, I want you guys to take a look at something. We are basically doing a very light week this week, and I want you to take advantage of this and get caught up. Many of you are several units or several lessons behind, and I need you to get caught up. So this week is very simple. Take that post test on cells and do the tutorial. Don't forget to do the guided notes. The guided notes are going into your notebook, and I'm going to collect them before October 15th. That'll be the second time I've graded a notebook. October 15th is the last day of the 9 weeks, and that's the day that I got to put in grades. And everything I have from the beginning of class until now, all the assignments have to be completed. Just a quick reminder, if you go into Schoology, look for zeros, look for low grades, I will give you the opportunity to make up all of them, okay? But you have to let me know which ones you want done. But many of you are just taking a 40% on one of those mastery tests and letting that go. I need that fixed. I want those done, and I want them brought up. Okay, so we're going to go into, pause. So we've moved on to the nervous system. Now the nervous system is one of the first systems we're going to study. So I want to be clear about something. A system in our body, or in this case, animal body, is made up of a bunch of organs. Organs are made up of a bunch of tissues. Tissues are made up of a bunch of cells. Therefore, this is a cellular-based system, and we're going to look at it like that. So we're going to study nerve cells. We're going to understand how the nervous system works, including right down to the cellular level. In this lesson, we're going to develop and use a model to show how the nervous system processes and responds to stimuli from all other body systems. It's got a function that's to talk to us. It's how our brain kind of knows what's going on with our body. I mean, think about it. If you step on a nail, a message is sent from the nerves in the part of your foot where the nail pierced, all the way through your leg, through your abdomen, and into your spinal column, and finally to your brain, where your brain interprets it. This is all part of the nervous system. And so plus the nervous system is how, like, if I lift my arm, it sends a signal from my brain through the nerves into the muscles to then lift my arm. And there's a mechanical, you can't see it, but I'm lifting my arm right now. There's a mechanical attachment of muscles to bone. The muscles are what we call innervated, and then they contract and move the arm. So there is an input and an output, and this is all how our brain senses and then controls our body. And a lot of the nerve functions are done without the brain at all, certainly not without you being conscious. I mean, up until this moment, be honest, were you thinking about having to breathe? Okay? No one has. You don't have to say breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. It's automatic. Do you have to focus on how to digest? Of course not. Your body does it all automatically. So there's a lot of automatic functions in your body that are also handled by nerves. So name a sensory organ. And I'm going to give you a hint here, and that is, what are the 5 senses? Okay, pick one of them, and what organ senses it. There you go. So remember, I told you that all systems are based on cells. Well, here's the cell. This is a single cell. It's called a neuron, and these neurons have 2 parts. They have an input and an output. Okay, what they basically do is they're part of a chain of cells that goes from wherever in your body all the way to the spinal column and the brainstem. Okay, they're actually nodes. So follow my mouse. Nerve impulses come into any of these areas right here, and when this is stimulated enough, and this happens in milliseconds, but when this is stimulated enough, it sends a signal here to another nerve, which then goes to another nerve and to another nerve. And you can imagine that this end here is attached here to this nerve from another nerve here. It goes like this, and then this nerve actually goes to another nerve, which then goes to another nerve and all the way to the brain. It's kind of like the internet, in that there are pieces of it that sends signals from one place to the other, and these signals, of course, are how we get all of our information and then send all of our information. Okay, right now your eyes and ears are being stimulated by information, and that information is traveling from the organs, the sensing organs, your eyes and your ears, to your brain along this network of neurons. So we're going to take a closer look at this cell called a neuron. The interesting things about neurons is that they are developed pretty much by the time you're born. Well, that's not true. I mean, you will be developing them slowly over a short period of time, but roughly by the time you reach full physical maturity, yeah, you're pretty much, that's all. You're not going to, if you damage a neuron, it's done. And that's a problem with people because they get a lot of neural damage, and that leads to problems with their body. I have a friend who's paralyzed from the waist down because of a car accident, and right now his body will never regenerate that. Now, I don't believe it's going to stay that way. I've told him that I have faith that one day medical science is going to be able to regenerate his neurons, but they don't regenerate themselves. And that's a very interesting thing about nerves, is once the damage is done, it's done. And that's important to remember. Let's take a look at the actual structure. Taking a look, you'll notice that, remember I told you that there's one kind of output, and then these are all across here. These are all inputs. They're called dendrites, and these dendrites reach out and they connect to other nerves. So a bunch of nerves are connecting to this nerve, and this nerve will connect to another nerve which has a bunch of other nerves connecting to it. And it's kind of like, I don't know, to me I think of it like a highway. They all connect, okay? And you can see the direction of the nerve impulse. Now this is the body of the cell, and if you remember, we're talking about where all of the cell organelles are, the nucleus, the mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus, and all those fun words, okay? And these are parts of the cell that are doing the specific function. In this case, they are receptors, okay? Now these dendrites connect to the other end of this on the next cell, and in between the two is something called a synapse, and a synapse is a gap between the two, okay? And that is probably one of the most important areas of a nerve system, is the gap, the space between two cells, okay? They don't ever actually connect. There's a small space between them. This area here is called the axon, and it is wrapped in this stuff called myelin, or a myelin sheath. That's a protein that goes around it that helps to protect it. It's yeah, it does a job. It actually causes the nerve impulse to travel faster, and that nerve impulse is chemical and electrical. But there is an electrical pulse that goes from here and tells these to release a chemical, and that chemical then goes to the next cell. One thing I do want to remind you, not all parts, not all cells have this myelin. Some cells, some nerve cells don't have the myelin, and there is an important distinction between the two, having to do with neural functioning and psychology. And this is a really broad thing, but there are basically three kinds of nerve cells, or neurons. The first one we call the sensory neurons. These are the ones you think of as nerves, because they're the ones that, like, if I touch a hot object, that the tip of my finger that senses that heat is the sensory neuron. If I touch something cold, if I feel something soft or fuzzy or sticky or whatever, those sensations are picked up by the sensory neurons. They then carry the information to the central nervous system, where we find the next type of neuron called the interneuron. Now, inter means between, okay? So think about this. The interneurons in the spinal cord don't really do any sensing, but they carry information between the sensory neurons and, anybody want to guess? Anybody want to guess? Mostly the brain, although sometimes it happens, there's a cycle of which the neurons don't even pass to the brain. If you touch your hand to something hot, there is a cycle of neural activity that instantly causes you to remove your hand, and that functions outside of the brain. You can control it, but if you don't, it'll happen anyways. We've had people with severe brain damage, they're in comas, but they react because they have this neural cycle. So these interneurons and these sensory neurons are all kind of part of a cycle, and then sometimes they go straight to the motor neurons. Now the motor neurons are the opposite of sensory neurons, okay? The motor neurons actually send information. So sensory neurons are coming from the body to the brain, and motor neurons are going from the brain to the body. And by the way, sometimes, like I just said, they don't even pass through the brain. Like in this case, your sensory neurons picks up information. Oh my God, this is hot. It doesn't even ask your brain. It says snatch it away. So it kind of bypasses the brain. But for the most part, and you can control that, by the way, but for the most part, your sensory neurons go to the interneurons, which go to the brain, which go back to the interneurons, which go to the motor neurons. So it's like this pathway, and that's how you sense information and how you then move. All right. So when that process happens, that process of that thing's hot, that's called a spinal reflex. Spinal reflexes just totally bypass the brain. And brain reflexes are ones that are centered around the brain. That goes to the medulla oblongata. That's the one that requires a little bit more of a decision making. It happens quickly. Quite often it has to do with survival, but it does pass through the medulla oblongata, which is a funny word. But those are called brain reflexes. Instead of bypassing the brain, they actually go through the brain, and a part of the brain makes a decision about how to react. So this is one of the lesson activities, and this is going to be the first time I think that we've used a simulation. You'll need to click this button. It should take you to a page, a simulation page. Inside of Chromebook, you may have a little trouble with this. You're probably going to want to look in the top right hand corner where you would type in the URL and look on the right hand side of that bubble up there, that big long line, and see if there's some kind of an error message. But when it comes on, it's actually going to show you how a neuron simulates. Now, I will tell you this is complicated, but what I want you to understand is that this is the edge of the nerve. Okay, this is the inside of one of those dendrites. This is the outside. All right. Now, if we're going to zoom in, let's zoom in here and take a look at this, because the inside and the outside, and you'll notice that there is a membrane. This is literally just like this is a cell membrane. Okay, and if you remember, cell membranes have little gates or channels that allow stuff to go in and out, and each one of these little balls is a chemical such as sodium or potassium. Okay, and as things come in and go out, that's how the cell controls itself. But also what we're looking for is concentration. When the concentration inside of the cell gets too high because of a stimulation, okay, then it causes the neuron to fire. So I'm going to back out just a little bit, and we're going to hit this thing. I want to hit stimulate neuron. So watch, here it comes, and then bang, watch what happens. All this stuff comes inside, okay? Now it slowly goes right back outside, but briefly, temporarily, I think I'm going to zoom into it and show it to you again, okay? So watch, you got things coming in and going out, but when I can't, okay. When I stimulate the neuron, watch, it's going to get hit, and then bang, watch, all that stuff just floods in, okay? Now that is what causes, actually some stuff floods out, and then they slowly start working their way back and forth until they equalize out. But that flooding of those red structures, that sodium coming in, builds up in here enough that when, after a while, way down the line here, it tells the next cell, hey, boom, something happened. You need to let the brain know. It's really, I know, it's really complicated, but this is how every nerve in your body works. By something, let's just do it one more time. Watch, I'm going to zoom in. Watch all the little red balls on the outside, the sodium floods in, and all the little potassium on the inside floods out. Watch, okay? That's like you just got cut by something, right? Oh, all that stuff's coming in, and then the stuff starts flooding out. Now, after a while, then they start to equalize, okay? But that's not important. This is how the nerves work. Stuff gets just flooded in and flooded out, okay? That's what you need to see with the simulation. So when you do this, I want you to tell me what happens. Watch what happens. Now, yes, you have to answer all these, and I'm not going to do this for you, okay? So here's an explanation of what you just saw in the simulation. When the neuron's at rest, okay, you've got all of this, all these things ready to go. You've got I think the potassium on the outside and the sodium on the inside. I may have that backwards, right? And it's all ready to go. Okay, the gates are all the gates are ready. The gates are open like they're supposed to be. Everything's good. Read through this. I know it's a little complicated, but just basically understand that the cell is ready. All of the potassium is on the outside, all of the sodium is on the inside, and that's what the K stands for potassium, okay? And Na is sodium. So all the potassium is on the outside and all the sodium is on the inside, and the cell is ready to go, okay? When there is an action potential or a nerve impulse, the sodium rushes in. Or did I have that backwards? The potassium rushes in and the sodium rushes out, and that causes the nerve to fire. And that's what we saw in the simulation. And that's all I really want you to understand, is that there's just a matter of stuff coming in and going out, and that changes the state of the cell or of the nerve, and then the nerve fires. Okay, it can get very complicated. I thought I was going to go crazy in college studying this stuff, so don't make it complicated. Just understand that there's an inside and the outside of the cell. When the nerve is not being simulated, that's the sodium is on the outside, the potassium is on the inside. When the nerve does get stimulated, the sodium comes in and the potassium goes out. And it's for a brief moment. In fact, it's only for literally milliseconds. Then they go back to where they were. But that causes the nerve to fire. Now, some nerves fire faster than others. Some nerves are wrapped in this fatty, proteiny kind of stuff called myelin, which makes it move very rapidly, and sometimes it comes more slowly. And we have all kinds of different kinds of nerves. Dull, mild pain travels through nerves that are not covered in myelin, but sharp pains, sharp senses go through the myelin because they need to travel faster. So remember me telling you about the synapse. Now this is a situation here. This is called the presynaptic and postsynaptic. So the information is traveling from this cell, the presynaptic cell, to the postsynaptic. So we're going this way, right? If this were sensory information, this would be going towards the brain, okay? But notice that, remember I told you they never touch. And so as a result, there's a gap. But what happens is the presynaptic cell shoots something called a neurotransmitter towards the postsynaptic cell. And when enough of these neurotransmitters build up, then this postsynaptic cell fires and it passes the information along. Now this happens so fast, in milliseconds. It happens in a thousandth of a second. So this is a very high-speed process. We would have to slow it down dramatically to look at it. But every single cell in your body works this way, and your brain is nothing but a series of these synapses. So your thinking process is basically what you're looking at here. Thinking involves passing neurons from one cell to another. Okay? Now let's look at the process of it. And oh my goodness, is this complex. Okay, so I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. There's sodium, there's calcium, there's all kinds of things in here, all right? And so when the presynaptic cell is stimulated, here's the nerve impulse. Yes, there's all these little gates, and calcium floods in and potassium floods out. But essentially, these neurotransmitters get flooded into this space, into this synapse, and when they build up enough, the next cell fires. That's all there is to it. If enough of these get shoved out in here, and remember this happens so fast, this happens 1,000 times a second, right? But when enough of these get put into here, then this nerve fires, and somewhere down on the other end of this thing, the same thing's happening again. And that's how information goes from the tip of your finger all the way to your brain. By the way, there is a certain number of these neurotransmitters. Oh, there's 4 big kinds of neurotransmitters. That's these little pink balls right here. There's 4 kinds, okay? And believe it or not, a healthy synapse or a healthy brain has a healthy amount of these in there. But people with certain mental disorders, we found a long time ago that they have either too much or not enough of these things in the synapses, and as a result, too much of something called of a neurotransmitter called dopamine can lead to clinical depression. This isn't something the person's not working at doing. This is something physically wrong with their brain. That's why we try to treat them, and we treat them with medicine such as Xanax, and Xanax helps to control the neurotransmitters right through here, and as a result, a person with depression may not be as depressed because now they're going back to a healthy number of neurons, or I'm sorry, of neurotransmitters in between the neurons. And it's a miracle, because up until we figured this out, we just thought that people that were depressed were just crazy. But as it turns out, there's something physically wrong with the brain. It's like having a cold. So we can treat it with medicine just like we treat diseases. Okay, the rest of this should be a little bit easier. You're familiar with a lot of this stuff. The parts of the central nervous system, we basically break it down into two main sections. The central nervous system, that's going to be the brain and the spinal column, and then all those things that branch off of it, excuse me, all the little nerves that push out and come back in. So that's the peripheral nervous system, okay? And so if you think of it that way, you got a central connection to where all the peripheral nerves go to and then come out of, depending on whether we're getting information from our senses or we're pushing out information to our body. And then you got the central nervous system. So your brain and the spinal cord is your central nervous system, and then you got that peripheral. Okay, so let's take a look. Now, if you've ever met anyone that's had any kind of physical damage to their brain, you'll know that it doesn't take much. The brain is incredibly sensitive. The good news is that it's encased in several layers of protection. These are called the meninges. They actually also protect the spinal column as well. And I mean, I've hit my head, everybody's hit their head, and you didn't die from it because as sensitive as your brain is to damage, you are surrounded by these things called meninges. The meninges can actually shield the brain from damage. I mean, think about football players and boxers, how much impact their head takes, and it takes a long time before they get brain damage. Now, I will tell you this, just like years ago boxers started noticing real problems with their brains, like Muhammad Ali, one of the most famous fighters of all time, has Parkinson's syndrome because the front of his brain, his head kept getting impacted, and the brain would hit the inside of the cranial case, and it caused damage to this area right here, which led to a disease called Parkinson's. Football players are starting to suggest that they're having similar problems as well, because they take impacts and get damaged as well. So damage can happen here and cause real problems. All right. It is floating in this stuff called cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is clear and not too thick, but it's thicker than water. We are told in first aid that if when we do an assessment on somebody that's had some type of trauma, one of the first things we should look for is clear liquid leaking out through the nose, because that would suggest some type of damage and that the cerebrospinal fluid is leaking out. Okay. Of course, this section here is called the brain. That's the skull. And we are going to talk briefly about all these little parts right here. So the big part, the big chunk of what we think is the brain is called the cerebrum. Okay. And you click on it, it'll tell you it's the largest part of the brain. It has two halves, the left and the right hemisphere, and it controls language, learning, voluntary movements, memory, speech, and sensory perception. That's what the cerebrum does. The next one down is called the thalamus. The thalamus is located between the cerebral cortex and the midbrain. It's primarily responsible for transferring information between the two. Okay, and it covers almost all major senses except for the ones that have to do with the nose. Smell comes in differently, but it does not go through the thalamus. The hypothalamus is underneath it, and it's hypo literally means under, so it's that thing underneath the thalamus. It's about the size of a fingernail, but it's one of the most important parts of the brain, and it helps you to maintain homeostasis. Hypothalamus helps you to control your blood pressure, your thirst, your appetite, your balance, you name it. Whenever your body says I'm hungry, it's your hypothalamus that says, hey, go eat something. And even though it's incredibly small, it is responsible for maintaining the body's internal stable environment. Okay. The midbrain is right in the middle of the brain. Yeah, big surprise there. It regulates motor control, which is like movement and balance. It regulates your sleeping cycles. It regulates your body's temperature. It's also associated with vision and auditory processing. Auditory means listening. So right now, you are looking at and listening to this video, and a lot of the information, the processing that's happening, is going through your midbrain. And let's see, the cerebellum, that's underneath the cerebrum. It's kind of a heavily folded part. It's in the back of the brain. By the way, if you don't know this, this is the front over here where it says hypothalamus. That's about where your nose is. Okay. The cerebellum is responsible for coordination, balance, the smooth movement of skeletal muscles. Have you ever seen somebody that has like jerky movement? That's because the cerebellum either is not working or is starting to degrade. It's responsible again for more motor skills. Your movement is done by several parts of your brain, but these are the fine motor skills, such as playing the guitar, or piano. I'm trying to learn the piano right now, and oh my goodness. The pons it transmits signals between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. So it's kind of like the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And these areas right through here, they're just like places where stuff gets transferred from the cerebrum to the cerebellum to the body. Okay, the medulla. Well, let's do the brainstem. The brainstem connects the brain with the spinal cord. It is the medulla oblongata and the pons. So the pons and the medulla oblongata together make the brainstem. And we just talked about the pons, so let's talk about the medulla oblongata. It transmits signals from the brain to the spinal cord, is basically what it does. It's also responsible for involuntary actions such as breathing, blood pressure, and heart rate. That happens right there in the medulla oblongata. Okay? Now, if we were to slice you in half and look down at your spinal column and zoom in, so we're like standing above you looking down, there's three kind of main areas that you need to be aware of. The first one is called the gray matter. That's kind of in the middle, and it's full of dendrites and cell bodies, and it's kind of like the middle of an electrical wire. Okay, it's where the information passes. The white matter on the outside, it's got a lot of myelinated axons. This is also transmitting lots of information as well. Okay. And so there's just two different kinds of nerves in here. This whole thing would be like the inside of a wire, and there's two different kinds of nerves in there, and some of them, they transmit information rapidly. They transmit information from one part of the body to the other. Yeah, you need to know what they mean, but don't get too caught up in it. Okay. Finally, the dorsal column is the white matter. That's this right here. It's in the white matter. It contains even more axons, and they release sensory signals associated with touch and pressure to the brain. So each one of these is long fibers of nerves, and they each have, they're just very different in what kind of information they send. And that's all you really need to know, is what kind of information does the dorsal column send, the white matter send, and the gray matter. And that was the central nervous system. That was the brain and the spinal cord. Now we're going to start talking about the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral means outside. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system is basically all those nerves that are connected to the central nervous system and the spinal column. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves, for a total of 43 spots where the body connects to the spinal column and the brain. Okay, so it's kind of like where the wires are plugged in, right here along the column and up here in the brain. There's 43 different spots where the nerves start coming from the outside of our body in. All right. So we divide these peripheral nerves up into two groups. The first one is called the somatic nervous system. Now, somatic means body, okay? And so the somatic nervous system helps the body stay sharp, stay coordinated, stay in good shape. It's responsible for relaying information and controlling movements. It consists of nerves that carry information from the external receptors, like the tip of your finger, to the brain, and it also consists of motor neurons that carry information from your brain to your muscles. So these are the nerves that are the input and the output in a lot of cases. Okay, that's the somatic nervous system, and the bulk of your peripheral nervous system is made out of somatic nerves. And this is really what we kind of think of when we think of a nerve. This is the main type of thing. You'll see over here that we've got like if we sense heat, that goes from the skin to the spinal column, and then from there it'll go to the brain, maybe. But from here, we've also got these are all somatic nerves. They go from the spinal column to a muscle, like if we want to lift our arm, it goes through a somatic motor neuron. Now the automatic, or the autonomic, did I say automatic? My God. The autonomic nervous system is the one that we don't think about, okay? It's the one that regulates involuntary actions of the body. And there's two types. There's a sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic regulates the body's fight or flight. It prepares us to be to damage. So like if you've ever been scared, okay, your heart rate goes up, your pupils dilate, your blood flow increases, your breathing increases, you know, and you're ready to fight or get hurt. That's called the sympathetic system, and it's automatic. You really have no control over it. I used to have this cat that I loved to scare, because you sneak up on it and that cat's just, no, what's going on, and then you jump at it, and its pupils in its eyes would get so big so fast, because that, you know, it was prepared to be at battle ready. It's like going to battle stations. That's what sympathetic does. The parasympathetic system is a little different. It regulates the body's rest and digest mechanisms. It kind of takes over after the fight or flight does with the sympathetic system. It's parasympathetic, meaning it kind of comes behind it and puts our body back into a normal state. It kind of eases up our digestive system. It slows our heart rate and our breathing rate and our blood flow. So the autonomic nervous system are automatic reactions, and then what happens afterward. And I know that's a little unclear, but don't make it hard, okay? The sympathetic system, the autonomic nervous system has two parts. The sympathetic system is our reaction to some type of scary stimuli, okay? And the parasympathetic is how we kind of get out of that, all right, and bring ourselves back to normal. Okay, so now we're going to talk about our sensory organs. Remember, that was one of the first questions we asked in this tutorial, was name a sensory organ. Well, if you think of the five senses, you know, sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, each one of those involves an organ. We'll start with the eyes. The eye is a very complex organ. It's probably, that and the brain are the two most complex organs in the entire body. And there are people who actually argue against evolution because of the eye. There's no way the eye could have evolved. It is that miraculous, okay? But it does collect visual, you know, light coming in through the cornea and the pupil and the lens. Okay, the cornea, the pupil, the lens, and the iris, they are all involved in controlling how the light comes in, and then getting the light passed through the eyeball to the optic nerve in the back. Other than that, you got a little structure called the retina, and then the vitreous gel. The vitreous gel is what keeps your eyes all puffy and all, not like over puffy, but you know, it keeps them full, and a full eyeball is what you need to see well. The lens can get over, the lens flexes. There are muscles right here that causes the lenses to flex, and when you get old like me, the lenses don't flex as much, and that's why you need glasses. Sometimes people also, this lens gets cloudy. It's kind of like, have you ever seen a piece of plastic that was left outside? It was clear, but it was left out in the sun for a while, and then it turns kind of white. Well, the same thing happens to your eyes. The sun, the light going through it can eventually cause this lens to get cloudy, and that can cause people to have macular degeneration. You can actually go get surgery to fix that. The pupil, of course, is the area that widens and gets wider and thinner depending on the light source. The cornea is the coloring in your eye, but it has a function. There are two types of cells in the optic nerve. There are cones and rods. All animals have rods. Rods are the easy one. They're just let you see the intensity of light. But very few animals have the cones. The cones helps us to sense color, and that's rare. Most animals with eyes don't see in color. That's why a hunter can go out in the woods wearing bright orange, because deer can't tell the difference between that and just regular color or whatever they're hunting. So humans and chimpanzees and the like have color vision. There are organisms, there's like a sea anemone or something that can see like 10 billion more colors than humans. I don't know. So color vision is weird, but it is in humans, or in animals, higher animals, it's very rare, but it's caused by the cones. So the cones are kind of the really cool thing that lets us see in color. What would it be like to not see in color? The ear is another miraculous thing, and it's easily damaged, by the way. Through years of shooting guns and going to rock concerts, I've got damage to my ear, and my ears are constantly ringing. It's divided into three parts. The outer ear, which is just mostly structure. Believe it or not, this big floppy weird looking thing on the side of your head is designed to help capture sound waves and bring it right to this point and funnel it to here. Okay, and if you don't believe me, just try putting your hand up next to your head and then see the difference it makes if you put it behind it in front of it. Kind of like you're going, huh? With your, and you put your hand behind your ear so you can hear better. It actually gives you a larger area right here in which the sound is then funneled into here. And by the way, no two humans have the same ear shape. It's almost as good as a fingerprint, maybe better, right? The middle ear contains the eardrum and the ossicles. These are where the sound is turned into motion. All right, believe it or not, this membrane here, the eardrum or the tympanus, vibrates this guy, the ossicles, which then vibrates these guys here, the cochlea, and the cochlea and all turn it all. Once it gets right through here, you got an anvil and a drum and all that kind of stuff, and once it gets right there, that's kind of an amplifier. All right, and then right there it gets turned into a nerve impulse which goes to the brain. By the way, there's a tube called the eustachian tube because this is a sinus and it has to have a regulated pressure inside of it, and the eustachian tube goes actually down to your mouth. So it drains into your mouth. You actually swallow stuff that comes out of here. Ooh, weird, huh? This fluid right here, also one of the things that the ear is responsible for, other than sensing sound, is helping you to balance. Now you have all kinds of nerves in your body that help you to understand balance, but the ear is the main one. And the inner ear, this area right here, is the fluid. It's actually the difference in fluid from here to here, but that helps you to maintain your balance. And when this is goofed up, like I had the flu a couple years ago, and this fluid got goofed up, my eyes crossed and I couldn't stand up for about 5 hours. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. So there's lots going on here, but of course the main function of the ear is to take auditory signals and turn them into an electrical impulse that goes to the brain. A great sensing organ is the tongue. It is our sense of taste. By the way, the nose is also involved in our sense of taste, and if you were to somehow pinch your nose while you eat, your sense of taste would be incredibly diminished. But the tongue is, it has a lot of functions. It's a muscular kind of a digit kind of a thing that helps us to move food around. It helps us to create words as we talk, but it's covered in these little buds called, taste buds. I'm sure they have a real name. I guess it's taste bud. Ooh, look, a taste pore and a microvilli. Well, those help us to taste what goes into our mouth, and again turns it into an electrical signal that goes to our brain. Now, we used to believe that there were different zones, that you had a sweet zone on your tongue and a sour zone and a salty zone, but now we know that's not true. Now we know that there's just different, scattered all over the place, there's different receptors for different flavors, and when we eat foods, several different of these receptors are kind of combined at the same time. It's like instead of hitting one note on a piano, you hit like 8 notes and it sounds very different, and hit a different set of 8 notes and it sounds very different. With the same thing here, we get the different taste buds stimulated and we get different flavors. And so the tongue, one of my more favorite, I like to eat. Now the nose is very similar to the tongue. It has what's called an olfactory bulb, and it takes information out of the air. And again, same kind of a thing. In fact, it's very similar to the taste buds in the tongue. But out of the air, it, again, you'll notice this word axon. It turns it into electrical stimulation that goes down to the nerves, and then the nerves, actually I've got this backwards, don't I? The nerves here pick up these smells are called odorants, and they're stimulated here, they stimulate here, and they go all the way up to the olfactory bulb, which then sends that information to the brain. And that's why you can go, oh, you smell so nice, or oh, who farted? Because we get different odorants here that stimulate different nerves, just like on the tongue, different taste buds. These are different nerves here that are designed to send receptor signals to the brain. And it can say, hey, you smell that? That smells good, you should go eat. Or hey, you smell that? Stay away from that, that's stinky, right? And have you ever wondered why your mouth waters when you smell food? Well, that's because eating is a very important part of life. And so a lot of our nerve senses coming in have to do with eating. Ask any major chef, any huge, top chef, and they're going to tell you that it's not just the taste buds, it's the nose, you smell it, it's the eyes, you see it, it's the sensory in your hand, you feel it. They haven't really done much with smell it, although I guess crunching a taco is important. But it's all kinds of smells or it's all kinds of senses go together to give you this stimulation about food. It's not just taste, and that's important, because that not only does it help us to enjoy food, but it also gives us a much better chance of understanding whether or not this thing you're about to eat is good for you or not. If it smells bad, if it looks bad, if it tastes bad, we've been trained to say, okay, it looks bad, it tastes bad, it smells bad, don't eat it. And we save the biggest for last. The one you get the most sensation from is your skin. It's the largest organ in the body, and it's pretty much totally covered in nerves. And so everywhere you have skin, you basically have nerves, and these nerves do the same thing. They send information from the surface to the brain. But the thing is there's all kinds of different receptors. There's not just one type of nerve. You got receptors for pain, for pressure, for temperature, for touch, and we can do the difference. We can sense the difference between these types of things. My daughter's dog decided it needed to be pet this very second. So as we talk about this, I am rubbing this stupid dog's fur, and I can tell the difference between that and sandpaper, or that and I don't know, a sheet or a shirt or something. I can also tell that the dog is slightly warm instead of cold. I can also tell that its ear is soft, because I have all these different types of nerves in my skin that send those different information to my brain, and I've learned over the years what each one of those information means. And so that information coming in my brain means ooh, soft, or that information coming in means ooh, sticky. It's poking you, stop it. And okay, we've reached the end. Thank God. I know this one was long, you guys, but I gotta tell you, this nervous system tutorial is hard, so you may have to go back through this again. Make sure you complete your notes. Make sure you're getting caught up. Make sure you're Zooming with me. I've included in the email that I'm sending this to you with, I've included a Zoom link. I Zoom every day from 9 to 11 every day, and you can hop on it. I've had 2 people Zoom with me just today and ask questions, and I think I got them on the right track. So make sure that you are, if you have any questions, that you Zoom with me. In the future, I may very well start hosting live sessions in which I try to teach something, and I'll tell you guys in an email, hey, you guys, hop on my Zoom right now, and I'm going to clear up this little misconception here. If you have any things you want me to teach, shoot me an email and I'll put it together for you. Okay. Bottom line is that I do an awful lot here to help you out, and you need to take advantage of it, because it's a whole lot more than just going into Edmentum and doing the tutorials and taking the mastery tests. Alright, short week this week, not much going on. Get caught up, and I will see you guys next Monday. Bye.